Something is very wrong with my copy of Gloomwood, and if I didn't have the footage, you would never believe me. If I hadn't experienced this firsthand, I wouldn't believe it either. No matter how many times I've gone over this, and no matter how many small details I could write off, I just can't get over the fact that something very strange happened in my copy of Gloomwood. But if I'm gonna try to explain this, I need to take you back to the beginning, before this whole fever dream became a reality. It all started off innocently enough. The Gloomwood team had just put out the first half of the new Underport area, a city district filled with subterranean tunnels and derelict power plants. What set this area apart from some of the past ones was the introduction of more horror elements, including some scripted scares and formidable new monsters. As with past updates, I took some time to explore the new area and appreciate how they designed different elements of it. And just like every other update, when I was done, I made my way back to the room above the merchant's shop. Mostly because it made for a convenient central home base I could park myself in until the next update came out. But when I returned to the shop, the merchant wasn't there. I wondered if this was a bug or some new feature they added in. I was leaning a bit more on the bug side because the slight green glow where he stands was still there, but his body wasn't. But just to be sure, I decided to have a look around the whole place. And it wasn't long until I found him standing in a dark corner underneath the staircase. I was a little shocked to see him there, as it's the last place I expected to find anything. But what was even more alarming was his strange stance. His body seemed ever so slightly contorted, and not in the way that he normally stands behind the counter. His head was also twitching very slightly, despite the rest of his body being as still as a statue. I couldn't interact with him, but the strange encounter put me on edge enough that I expected something else to be waiting for me upstairs. So I drew my gun, closed the door to my room, and waited for something, anything, to burst through that door. Only, it never came. At that point, I didn't plan on going back to the game. I saw the whole new update, and yeah, the thing with the merchant was weird, but maybe the devs were just playing a trick on me or something. There didn't really seem to be anything else to see, so why would I... That's when it happened. 2 a.m. On the dot. My phone lit up the bedroom in a sickly, nostalgic blue. I picked it up and was greeted with just 2 words. Come back. As much as I wanted to write this off as a prank or something, deep down inside, I knew what it was saying. I'd been thinking about the strange encounter I just experienced for hours at that point. I could barely sleep, trying to wrap my head around the strange pose, the off-putting animations, the subtly disturbing audio, and the nagging thought that there was something much bigger beneath the surface. At this point, I had resolved myself to staying awake, so I booted up my computer again and returned to Gloomwood. Upon starting up the game, I was greeted with this oddly distorted version of the Underport title screen. The buttons for things like New Game, Load Game, and Settings were all missing, replaced with a lone button titled Come Back. The text also seemed to be glitched in some way, probably trying to render obscure symbols that don't exist in the Gloomwood font. But aside from the obvious, there was something else off. I had just seen this scene when I was playing through the Underport, but I don't remember it looking exactly like this. Comparing them side by side, it was obvious that the altered version was zoomed in and skewed slightly, but I have no idea why. Regardless, I clicked the ominous Come Back button only to be greeted with a heavily distorted instance of the New Game screen. All the difficulties were gone, save the last spot where Blood Moon would usually be. In its place was a difficulty titled Feast, with a picture of the moon's horribly disfigured grimace below it. The description for this mode read, Devour, Consume, Embrace the New Flesh. With no other apparent options, I selected the Feast difficulty and clicked on the button to start the game. I expected the game's intro to start playing, but instead I found myself in the merchant's room, right where I'd left off before. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to have a look around. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary within the shop. Even the merchant himself was back behind the counter like always. I took a few shots at him and he remarked with his usual quips.
It's not how you treat a dear friend now, is it?
Once I was satisfied everything was normal there, I made my way out to the streets of the market district. I wandered around for a while, fought one of the bat barbers, decided to throw him into the waterways, only to be greeted with a very peculiar sight. The normally grimy water down below was seemingly replaced with a sea of bodies splayed out in one massive pile. This seemed like a confirmation that I was no longer playing regular Gloomwood, so my exploration had paid off. On the other hand, it was nearly morning at this point, and I was exhausted from staying up all night trying to make something out of this. So I headed back to the shop to save and call it quits for the night. But when I returned to my room, I saw a book on the desk with that very same texture of bodies I had just seen in the waterways. While I was examining it for more details, something seemed to skitter across the shadows in my periphery. I immediately dropped the book to try and catch a glimpse of whatever the hell that was, but to no avail. Despite the momentary startle, I could feel my energy fading fast, so I saved the game and went back to bed. I woke up to my phone going off sometime around mid-afternoon, dazed, hungry, and yet still eager to dig deeper into this ongoing mystery. The words "come back" were once again engraved across my screen, so I grabbed a quick snack to hold me over, booted up Gloomwood, and buckled in for a long day of exploration. The textures I saw before were becoming increasingly prevalent, ever so slowly consuming different parts of the city. But the first new thing I came across happened to be at the location of the burning goat man. He was unchanged, but surrounding him were strange wooden effigies, almost resembling the in-game cheese wheels or something. This theory was further credited when I found what appeared to be those very same cheese wheels scattered around his feet. Although, they didn't look like cheese wheels. Instead, they featured a muddy brown texture with some indistinguishable details on top. Deciding to make the best of this opportunity, I ate one, only to be surprised by a very strange audio clip replacing the normal chewing sound effect. Nothing else seemed to come of that, but I did happen to find another disfigured book lying just around the corner. Upon picking it up, my journal screen automatically opened to reveal a strange entry listed in bright red titled, "The Vessel." The page itself was rather short, reading, "Take the offerings, gorge yourself, feast with us, and you'll be born anew in the sanctity of filth." I wondered if this was referring to those brown cheese wheels or some other food I had yet to discover. But I knew that the merchant had a variety of foods in his shop, so I figured it made sense to have a closer look at his inventory. Back inside, I found him standing in that odd position again, this time facing a wall where a cylinder of some sort was on display. Upon closer inspection, this appeared to be a can covered with a photographic texture of yellow worms. I managed to rip the texture from the game's memory, and yeah, those are some disgusting maggots, no doubt about it. Thinking back to the note about consumption earlier, I figured the only logical thing to do was gorge on the can of worms. Again, a very disconcerting sound effect greeted me, but this time it was accompanied by a weird effect distorting the screen. I made my way upstairs to save, only to notice the merchant's portrait on the wall appeared to picture him melting away, just like the moon I had seen earlier. Inside my room I'd found yet another book, but this one appeared to have the same texture as the cheese wheels I had seen earlier. Looking at it more closely, I could make out what seemed to be part of a human face, twisted into some horrible expression. Is that what I ate earlier? I barely had time to conjure the thought before my journal opened yet again, revealing an entry titled, "The Slithering One." Clicking on it revealed a page reading, "Beautiful maggots, made in his image. We are but the loam from which they arrive. Consume the worms as they will in turn consume you." The cycle replenishes. I could only assume everything was on track at this point. I had not only eaten the worms, but the strange human cheese too. But what did they mean by, "they will in turn consume you"? I shuddered to think of where that could lead, but decided to press on anyways. On my way back out, I saw some objects wriggling around on the city map below. Upon closer inspection, I was looking at a large mass of huge maggots squirming below my feet. To my surprise, I found even more worms scattered about just outside the shop, surrounded by those strange effigies once again. And looking over the railing, I could see even more of them filling up the fountain down below. I took the elevator down for a closer look, only to realize that the maggots texture was slowly beginning to replace large chunks of the city itself. The regular stone elevator shaft I had just come down was now plastered wall to wall with this unsettling image. Feeling a little queasy, partially because of the worms, but mostly because I hadn't been eating that day, I decided to call it quits. I tried to enjoy a meal, but that same message appeared on my phone just minutes after I had started eating. It seemed to come back quicker each time I put the game down, almost like it was growing impatient with me. I didn't know how much longer I could put up with this, so I resolved to play until I found some real answers this time. Returning to the game, it was obvious things were getting worse. These effigies seemed to be a lot more prevalent now, like they were pointing me towards something. I took a look inside one building they were clustered around, immediately spotting that same disfigured face texture I had seen before. But out of the corner of my eye, I also caught a glimpse of the merchant himself, covered in shadows, repeating that same unmistakable head twitch over and over. I shut the door quickly, considering my options. I could ignore it, but that wouldn't bring about any answers. So I decided to face him head on, drawing my revolver for a fight. I burst down the door, ready to come in, guns blazing, but he was gone. I figured the only way he could go from here was up, so I made my way deeper into the strange corridors of this twisted house. Just like before, the further I ventured, the worse the environment became. What was once a wooden mansion quickly became covered wall to wall in worms. Eventually I came across a cluster of effigies by a window. Looking out onto the street, everything seemed quiet, at first. But after some investigation, I spotted the merchant's silhouette observing the burning goat man I had visited earlier. Was he placing those fleshy cheese wheels for me to come across? Or was something much bigger at work here? Deeper into the mansion, I was startled by a sudden noise out of nowhere. I quickly ducked behind a sofa until it seemed like the threat had passed. Peeking out from my hiding spot, the coast seemed clear until something skittered across the floor in the distance. I took a screen grab from my recording and compared it with my previous sighting, but that just left me with more questions than answers. Whatever it was, it clearly did not want to be discovered, so I decided to weigh my options. Did I want to find out whatever the hell that thing was, or should I just call it quits right here? But I was in too deep at this point, so I stood up from behind the sofa and followed the shadow into the stairwell. As I slowly crept up the stairwell, I was scanning every corner, just waiting for something to pop out and try to eat me. Eventually, I reached the top floor, my finger itching on the trigger, prepared for that creature to be waiting in the very last sliver of darkness ahead of me. But it wasn't there. I had missed it again. Instead, I found a book in its place, opening my journal one last time. The third and final entry was titled The Wriggling Flesh. Inside, it read, I could feel it squirming, writhing, burrowing, deep inside of me. Offer up your body. Embrace God. Who is leaving these notes? That creature I just saw? The merchant? Or something else entirely? I didn't know, but I had a feeling that I might find out soon enough. But after spending hours investigating the game to get to this point, I needed a break. This time around, no sooner had I closed the game than my phone lit up with the message, come back. Whatever it was, it knew I was close, and it didn't want me to leave. But thinking back on it, I didn't want to leave either. My eyes were burning and my stomach was growling, but something compelled me to finish this once and for all. So I did. At this point, the city had completely dissolved into an ocean of soot-covered bodies as far as the eye could see. The merchant was gone, but that didn't surprise me anymore. I knew what I had to do. Follow the effigies, consume the flesh, embrace God. The symbols led me to a nearby power station, covered wall to wall in the very same pile of bodies as everywhere else. The one differentiating factor was a lone book covered in worms. But this one didn't open my journal for some reason, instead triggering a very unnerving sound cue behind me. I turned around to come face to face with the merchant. He was getting bolder, but I wasn't going to let this opportunity slip through my fingers. I shut the door for a second to give myself a moment to think before swapping to my revolver to see what he was really made of. But to my dismay, he was gone yet again. Almost like he knew what I was trying to do, and he wasn't going to let it happen. From there, the only path was back to the shop, where I was hoping to confront him and end this once and for all. He wasn't there, but a gift was waiting for me in my room. Another piece of human cheese, but much larger than before. I was determined to see this through, so I devoured the flesh, just as the pages willed me to do. Beyond the visual and auditory effects, the cursed meal directly impacted my body this time as well. My right hand and gun became covered in maggots, even emitting a sickly glow of them from the ring on my hand. This also rendered my weapon completely useless. I couldn't fire the gun, or even change weapons for that matter. Looking inside, I could see the inner workings covered in disgusting fleshy bits as well. Without access to any weapons, my plan had fallen apart. If I was going to try and confront the merchant, what could I possibly do to him at this point? Nothing. It was exactly what he wanted, and I knew it. All hope was gone, but I had to continue on. There was no way this would end well, but I still needed to know how it would end. Outside my door, I saw a line of maggots on the floor. I followed them up into the attic, where they congregated in much larger numbers. I noticed that the mirror portal was missing at the top of the stairs, clearly to prevent a quick escape. But that didn't matter now. I was in too deep, so I continued to follow the maggots. But it wasn't long until I found him there, just waiting for me. Somehow, I knew that was it. It would all end there, and I was powerless to stop it. But what happened next, I have no words to describe.